Getting a local service online should not feel risky or complicated. But most of the time it means opening ports, touching router settings, and worrying about security. Cloudflare Tunnel gives you a much better way to handle this. It creates a secure connection to the Cloudflare network without exposing your system to the internet. Your service stays private while still being accessible from anywhere. When you look at Cloudflare, the setup can feel confusing. There are a lot of options, and the documentation is not always easy to follow. It is easy to overthink it before you even start. In this video, I will keep things simple. We will set up Cloudflare Tunnel using Docker so everything runs in a container. This makes the setup easier to manage and also easy to even migrate later. By the end of this video, your tunnel will be up and running, and you will know exactly what each part is doing. Let us get started and build this together. First of all, we do need a domain to use Cloudflare Tunnel, and that's a prerequisite for this setup. You can use any existing domain you already have or purchase one from any domain provider you prefer. Once you have a domain, let's open Google and search for Cloudflare. Here, you will find a result from cloudflare.com. Just open it. If you don't have an account, click on Start for free. Otherwise, just log in. Once you're logged in, you will land on the account homepage. Here, you'll need to add your domain to Cloudflare if it's not already there. I already have mine added, so to add yours, just click the Onboard a Domain button. Then fill in your domain and click on Continue. Cloudflare will then check your DNS and provide the name servers you need to point to Cloudflare. Just follow those instructions, and it'll take a little bit of time, but be patient. Cloudflare will add your domain. In case you don't have a domain yet and want to purchase one, you can click on Buy a Domain and search for its availability, then purchase it directly from Cloudflare. Since my domain is already set up, we can move on to preparing the Docker Compose file. I have opened VS Code and connected to my Ubuntu server with an SSH connection, and both Docker and Docker Compose are already installed on this device. So first, let's create a directory to keep all of our files. Inside that, we'll create the Docker Compose file. Now in this file, we will define the services section first and name this service as Cloudflare. Remember, whatever you name this service, you need to provide that same name when you will run commands later. Don't worry, I'll point out where it's needed. Next, we need the image. So let's quickly open Google and search for Docker Hub. Open the official Docker Hub website and search for Cloudflare. Among the results, look for the one named Cloudflare/Cloudflared. This is the Docker image used as the client for Cloudflare Tunnel. Let's open it. You can pull the image directly from here, but since I prefer to use a specific version, let's first take a look at the available tags. As you can see, several version tags are listed here. Choose the one you want, copy the image tag, and then paste it into your Docker Compose file. I use specific versions to avoid unexpected updates that might break the setup. However, since this exposes your services to the internet, remember to keep updating the image periodically to stay secure. Now let's provide a container name. Then we need to define a volume. So let's map a volumes directory from this specific directory where your Docker Compose file exists to the /home/non-root/.cloudflared directory inside the container. Next, set the restart policy to unless stopped. For now, I'm setting the network mode to host so it can access services on the network. We will try different combinations later. There are a couple of important steps to complete before running the Docker container. One of them is setting the correct owner and group for the Docker volume directory, which is required for the Cloudflare container to work properly. So let's create a directory named volumes next to the Docker Compose file. Now, in the terminal, let's cd into the Cloudflare directory. If we run ls-l, you'll see that the owner and group for the volumes directory matches with my current user. To change the ownership to the Cloudflare user and group, type sudo chown 65532 for the user, followed by : then 65532 for the group, and then the directory name, and press enter. Now if we check again, you will see the user and group have been changed successfully. This is what the Cloudflare container needs to use this directory for storage. Now I'll show you the documentation from Cloudflare. It's helpful to have it open if you need to make any adjustments to your setup. That way you can easily search for things. Here I'll just reopen the Cloudflare landing page. To access the documentation, go to Developers, then Developer Library. It will open the Cloudflare docs. Click on Docs directory at the top. It will open up a list of all the different services provided by Cloudflare. Scroll down until you find Cloudflare 1 and open it. You can see in the left nav bar, a lot of options are there. From here, we will open the documentation for the method we are using. Let's expand networks, then connectors. Here you'll find the Cloudflare Tunnel section. But we are not done yet. Let's go to the end and expand Do More with Tunnel. Open Locally Managed Tunnel. And at last, click on the Create a Locally Managed Tunnel. When I was setting up Cloudflare Tunnel a few years back, it was pretty tough to find the exact documentation. I'm showing you this so you don't have to suffer like I did. Now, if you see here, the first step is to install Cloudflared on Windows, Mac, and Linux. There's nothing here for Docker since we don't need to install anything there. So we'll directly move to step 2, which is to authenticate Cloudflare. In this step, we'll log in from our Docker container to our account. The command is simple, Cloudflared Tunnel Login. But for our case, as we are running it in Docker, the command will be a little different. You can see the service name is Cloudflared, but since we named our service as Cloudflare, we will use that instead. Then add the command Tunnel Login. So let's go back to our terminal. First, let's clear these previous commands. Now, as we want the command to run inside the container, we will use Docker compose run, then add --rm. This will remove the container once the command is executed. Then we will mention the service name, which in our case is Cloudflare. If you're using a different service name, use that here. And finally add the command Tunnel Login and press Enter. This will pull the Docker image. Once the image is pulled, a link will be displayed, and the container will stay active until you actually log in. So copy this link from here and open the browser where you already have your Cloudflare account logged in. Now, before we go to the link, let me show you something. If we click on the account icon here and open Profile, then go to API Tokens, you will see I only have one API token, which I use for a different purpose. Once we log in using our Docker container link, a new API token for this tunnel will be added here. So let's open a new tab and paste the URL we copied from VS Code, then press Enter. A page will open to authorize the Cloudflare tunnel. Here, it's showing my domain. If you have multiple domains, you can choose for which one you want to create the API token. So just select the domain. Cloudflare will prompt you to authorize, and then it will configure your tunnel for your zone. Let's click on Authorize. Even if it looks like it's stuck, don't click twice. It's working in the background. Once it's done, it will show a success message. Now we can close this tab. And if we refresh the API token page, you'll see a new Cloudflare Tunnel API token has been created. That is the first step. Now, if we go back to VS Code, you'll see the container has stopped, and also a credentials file has been created in our map directory. This is the same directory mapped in our Docker volumes. So if we check inside the volumes directory, there's a file, which this container will use every time to log in using the API token. Now let's move on to the next step, which is creating the tunnel. If we follow the documentation, we need to run the command Cloudflared Tunnel Create, followed by the name of the tunnel. So let's head back to VS Code terminal. Here, just press the up arrow to get the previous command we ran, and replace the login word with create. Now let's give this tunnel a name. I want to name it as private. But before we run this, let's head back to Cloudflare and go to Account Home. On the left navigation bar, click on Zero Trust. Cloudflare tunnels are configured from this Zero Trust portal. Here you can see it's mentioned Cloudflared 1, for which we are referring the documentation. So if we go to Networks, you'll find an option to manage tunnels. You can view or add different types of tunnels from here. The process can be complicated, and sometimes there's a billing form you need to fill, even though the service is entirely free. But don't worry about it, we can easily create and manage our tunnels from the terminal. Once we create it, we'll be able to see them under the connectors. If we open it, there are no tunnels yet, and we have a button to add one. You can see we have this Cloudflared option here. We can click on this and add a tunnel. But as I mentioned earlier, before creating a tunnel, accessing this page was very hard. So we will not be using the GUI. Instead, I've been using the CLI method from the official documentation for almost a few years now. It works every time without any issue. Once we create our tunnel from the CLI, it will be visible on this page. So let's head back to our VS Code and run this command we prepared. Once the command executed successfully, we can confirm it from this last statement. Created tunnel private with ID, then the tunnel ID. You can also see a JSON file is created with the same tunnel ID in the volumes directory. Now if you go back to Cloudflare and refresh the page, you will see we have our private tunnel available here. You can also match the tunnel ID. But currently the status is inactive, which is okay. We'll take care of that once we have configured everything properly. So let's move on to the next step. I will head back to the documentation, and if we scroll down, we have a command to list all tunnels. If we run it in terminal, then it will just list all the available tunnels. Now let's get to the next step, that is creating a configuration file. Here we have two options, one for connecting an application and another for connecting a network. So let's copy this configuration and head back to our VS Code. Here we need to create a config file inside the volumes directory. But since we changed the owner and group for this directory, we won't be able to create it from VS Code. So let's use the terminal and try to create the config file. But if we do not use sudo, then the command will fail. So let's add sudo and try again. Once the file is created, let's paste the copied code here. But if we try to save this file, it's showing an error. That's because we don't have permission yet to access this file. If you check the permission of the config file, the owner and group is set to root. So let's change the permission only for this config file. Type sudo chown, followed by your username, then add a colon and your group name. If you do not have any specific separate group, it's usually the same as your username. Then mention volume/config.yml and press enter. Now we should be able to save this file. Next, we need to replace the tunnel UUID with our tunnel ID. You can find the tunnel ID in the VS Code terminal or inside the volumes directory on the left panel. And also you can get it directly from your Cloudflare. Copy it from anywhere and replace this section in the config file. Also in the credentials JSON file, our path is different than the template. So let's copy the path from our Docker Compose file and paste it in our config file. Next, we need to configure the DNS so that Cloudflare will know for which domain the traffic needs to be routed to the tunnel. If we go to our Cloudflare account homepage and open our domain, you will see a DNS option in the left navigation bar. Under that, if we open the records, you'll see the current DNS records configured for this domain. For you, this might be empty, or if you have already set up any records for your website, those will be visible here. In my case, I have a lot more for other different services, but none of them actually points to our tunnel. They are for different purposes, but we don't need to modify any of those. We'll create our own subdomain for each services, so whatever DNS record we already have will also be functional. We can create those records from this GUI, but it's much easier to do it from the terminal. We can do that using the command route DNS, followed by the tunnel name and the domain. It will create a DNS record for that domain in Cloudflare. So let's go back to VS Code and clear the terminal. Here, I will modify the previous command by replacing the last part after tunnel with route DNS, followed by the tunnel name, which is private in our case, and then provide a subdomain of your actual domain. For example, if I want to expose my TrueNAS web UI using Cloudflare, the domain would be like truenas.mydomain.com. You can use any name in place of TrueNAS. Once you run this command, a new DNS record will be added in Cloudflare. You can see the confirmation in the terminal. Now, if we go back to Cloudflare and refresh the page, you'll see a new record has been added, where the name is set to TrueNAS, and the content points to our tunnel. That means any request coming through this domain to Cloudflare will be redirected to our tunnel. And everything will be proxied behind Cloudflare, so anyone accessing the website through this domain won't get the server's public IP address. Let me also add another record for Proxmox. And if we check again in Cloudflare, you'll see we have one more DNS record for Proxmox. Now that we have two records pointing to the same tunnel, Cloudflare will send the traffic for both domains through that. The user will only be able to access the services we've configured in the tunnel's configuration file, and nothing else. But we haven't configured the tunnel side yet. As per the documentation, we are ready to run the tunnel. But we also need to configure our routes. We can find those details here under Configuration File. If we scroll down a bit, we'll find two options, one for private networks and another for published applications. We need to use this one. So let's copy this part from Ingress and paste it into our config file. Under Ingress, we need to define the list of routes. For the host name, we need to mention the domain, where we want to access the service. Like for TrueNAS, I'll update the host name with a subdomain we just added in our DNS record. Similarly, we need to do the same for Proxmox. And in service, we need to mention the address where the service is available. Like for the TrueNAS web UI, I'll add the TrueNAS server IP address. By default, TrueNAS uses port 80 for the web GUI, and we're accessing it over HTTP. So with this configuration, that domain will point to our TrueNAS server. Similarly, for the Proxmox web UI, we can copy this address and update the IP address, followed by the port number, which is 8006 for Proxmox. But the Proxmox web UI is only accessible through HTTPS protocol, so I will update that as well. Here I'm exposing TrueNAS and Proxmox just for the purpose of this demo. It's not a good idea to expose these services over the internet. I'll take it down after the recording is completed. Only expose the services you actually need outside of your local network, like a website or Home Assistant, but make sure to put two-factor authentication for additional security. Now, one more thing to consider for Proxmox is that it uses a self-signed certificate, so we need to add one more parameter for this to work properly with Proxmox. Just after this line, add origin request. And under that, we need to mention no TLS verify and set it to true. Now this should work for Proxmox as well. Make sure to keep this last line, else the container will fail to start. Cloudflare Tunnel supports many different types of protocols, but HTTP and HTTPS will be the most common ones you'll need. You can check the documentation page for all other different types of protocols that Cloudflare Tunnel supports. Now that we have a proper configuration file for the server side, and the DNS route is set up on the Cloudflare side, we should be able to run the tunnel. So let's head back to the previous page and scroll down to the Run the Tunnel section. Here we can see, this is also similar like the previous commands. We just need to add run after tunnel, followed by the tunnel ID. But this time, we won't run the command using the terminal, as we want this to run every time the container starts. For that, let's head back to VS Code and open the Docker Compose file. Here mention command, and type tunnel run followed by the tunnel name. This will run the command every time the container starts. Now, all we need to do is head to the terminal and deploy the container again. Let me clear the terminal, then run docker compose up-d. This will deploy the container. Now, if we try to access the TrueNAS domain, we should be able to access its web GUI with a valid SSL. Let me also check for Proxmox. We need to remove this last part, as it was for TrueNAS. You can see, we are able to access the Proxmox web UI as well. So, using the Cloudflare Tunnel, all traffic from the internet will only be able to access those services we mentioned in our configuration file, and not the entire network. Even you can isolate this setup within a Docker network, preventing it from accessing your entire network. Let me show you how. I will close this tab and head back to the VS Code terminal. Here I'll bring the container down. Next, we'll host Vault Warden, since it also requires SSL to sign up. For that first, we need to set up a DNS route on the Cloudflare side. But before we do that, let's go to our Docker Compose file. Here comment out this command section to run the tunnel and save the file. Now, as we already did earlier, I'll use the same command to add another domain for Vault Warden. If we go to our Cloudflare account and refresh the DNS records page, you'll see a new entry for Vault Warden here. Now let's go to VS Code and deploy the Vault Warden container. Before that, I'll uncomment the command in the Cloudflare Docker Compose file and save it again. Then let's create a new directory for Vault Warden. And inside that, I'll create the Docker Compose file. Here, let's copy the code for Vault Warden. I have an entire video in detail on Vault Warden, which you can find through the I button. I'm using the same code here. Since we'll be using Cloudflare to access this, we don't need to expose any port. So let me comment that out. Now for the Cloudflare container, to communicate with the Vault Warden container, we need to keep them in the same Docker network. So let me quickly create a new network, Cloudflare. Next, I will add this Vault Warden service to the Cloudflare network. Also, at the end, we need to add a network section under which we will define Cloudflare and set it to external as true, as we already created it from the terminal. Now copy this network section and add it to the Cloudflare service too. We also need this part. And comment out this network mode section. Make sure to save both the files. Then let's open the config file. From here, I will copy this part and paste it below. Now that Cloudflare won't be able to access TrueNAS and Proxmox, we can comment that out. Then, below here for the host name, I will set it to Vault Warden. And as they are in the same network, so instead of this IP address, we will use the service name. So let's replace it with the service name Vault Warden. Since Vault Warden is accessible on port 80, and here also for the port it's set to 80, so we should be able to access it. Now let's run Docker Compose up-d. Our Cloudflare container is up, but we still have to deploy Vault Warden. So let's cd into the Vault Warden directory and run Docker Compose up-d. Now Vault Warden is also up, and we should be able to access it from the browser. Like this, you can only keep those services you want to expose in the same Docker network. So that will only isolate the services that you are exposing. I hope this video helped you to achieve this in a very simple way. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. In case if you are facing any issues, you can mention it in the comments, or you can also join my Discord server. We have a very helpful community there. Now that you're able to expose your internal services using Cloudflare, check out the next video to take your home lab to the next level. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more such content. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.